Hi, I'm Kate Cornell, and you're about to watch two authors talking. Don't say we didn't warn you. Hi, I'm Kate Cornell, and I am here with Pamela Skjolsvik. She's the author of Death Becomes Us and Forever 51. Thanks for joining me today. Happy
Thanks for
birthday.
having me.
I'll
And
say it. I'll
thank
say
you.
happy birthday. So I want to get right into this. This is two authors talking. So you're a writer, I'm a writer. Everyone wants to know what writers think about writing. So my first question is, when did you know you were a writer?
I'm a writer. Oh. um, Probably, I didn't know what it was, but I remember my dad got me this um, little tape recorder, and
Mhm.
I used to tape people. Like I hide it under the dinner table and record conversations. And um, So it was a form of writing because I like to eavesdrop on people, and I started out as a nonfiction writer. So it was a way of recording what was happening, and that was like kind of the beginning where it's like you know, I wanted to hear and remember what people were saying. That was important, but I don't think I actually was like I'm a writer until I gave myself permission to write by entering grad school when I was 38 to get an
Okay.
MFA in creative nonfiction. So that was like I'd sold a business and I was just like, I'm going to take 2 years and I'm going to write a book. And that's what I did.
All right.
So
Wow.
that's why I'm like, I'm a writer, by
So
golly.
where did you go for your MFA?
I went to Goucher College, which is in Towson, Maryland, and it's a low residency MFA program in creative nonfiction. So we did not
Cool.
make things up in that MFA program. It was all about. So writing my second book was a little, I felt icky doing it because I'm like, boy, I'm really making stuff up now. So,
So what's your normal writing routine?
well, I wish I could say that, yes, I wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and I sit down and I type and it's awesome. I don't write that way. I find that I am the most productive when I have a ton of stuff going on and I have a deadline. So if, like right now, I'm supposed to be writing bonus content and I know I have to do it and
Mhm.
I have the specific scene, but I'm also my nonfiction background. I have to get the details right. So I'm waiting on a call from a historical architect in North Dakota to call me back so I can know what this house is going to look like in 1882 in Pembina, North Dakota. So
Okay.
but once I know that, then I'll get it done. Um, but I have never been the type of writer who just writes every day, and I hear that so often, like, oh, if you're going to write every day and make it a habit. Um, I wish I could. I just don't have the time. So,
Well, so you have Death Becomes Us is nonfiction,
hmm
and Forever 51 is fiction. So was there any sort of difference? I mean, you say you don't have that routine and some of your routine relies on your research. So was there some difference in how you approach those projects then?
well, I have to say that with Death Becomes Us, that was more, I had to immerse myself in what I was learning about, like in the lives of the people who worked in these certain professions. So that, I was doing a lot of research and then I would write it down immediately so I wouldn't forget it. And I had to
Hmm.
transcribe a lot of interviews. So that was kind of my process through that. And then with Forever 51, that just came out of nowhere. And it was just like, I'm going to write a vampire book. But I was really compelled to do it. And it was so fun. I had fun writing it. Death Becomes Us was not fun. I got a lot. I got a lot out of writing that book, but the vampire book, I actually wanted to write it. And what I had to do with that book was I couldn't write in my house because um, I don't know, in my house, I feel like, oh, well, I got to clean and I have to do this. So I had to, it's so stereotypical, but I went to the Starbucks every
Yeah.
day for an
Yep.
hour. And it's like I have no internet and I'm going to write for an hour. And that was what I had to do to get that book out, done.
Yeah, the internet is a huge distraction. Um,
Yes.
I need to be, for me, when I write, I have Pandora, so I really prefer to have internet access so I can listen to music while I write. But you have to be very diligent in not like, no, I'm just going to check Facebook because it's a chapter break or
Yeah.
whatever the reason may be.
No, the
But yeah,
internet is not your friend when you're trying to write a book.
yeah,
I mean, for research stuff, I mean, I do a lot of research because I want to get the details
right,
right.
right.
But that can go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
yeah,
I need to do that, and then it's like I'm not getting any writing done.
yeah.
So, yeah, I try not to have. I could get internet access at Starbucks, but I just don't
Right,
even go
right.
there.
But that helps. It helps to be somewhere where you're like, I have an option of not connecting to it. Yeah, I can see
Yep.
that. Yeah. So do you have a candy or a snack drawer? Or do you snack on something while you write?
Nope. I used to smoke. Don't do that anymore. I chew a lot of gum, but I don't. I don't have a candy. No.
What do you get at Starbucks when you write?
I get a tall, skinny vanilla latte.
All right.
And in the summer, when it's super hot, like it is now, it's the vanilla frappuccino like thing. I don't know if that's the right one, but it just tastes like ice cream. And it may have caffeine in it. I don't know. It's just delicious.
All right.
This is my plug for Starbucks. Hi,
Yeah. Yeah.
Starbucks.
Free. Just seeking a sponsorship for the show. Um,
Exactly.
is there a word or a phrase that you use too much in your first draft or something that you find you repeat?
Just.
Just. All right.
The word just. I have a problem with just. I don't know why. And then I found when I did the edits with Forever 51, even though there's like a God element in that book, like it's a 12-step kind, it's an odd book, but I use the word God a lot.
Okay.
And not like dear God, but like God, you know. So I found that I used the word God a lot in this last book, and I had to kind of take some of those out. But just and God, just God, those two words.
All right. So in Death Becomes Us, you said you had to do some transcribing. Um, so when you're transcribing, is it word for word or do you have to edit? Because I mean, just in having this conversation, I've probably said a bunch of ums or whats or likes that shouldn't be there. But when you're getting that into the book, is that something you also look for, like repeated words or weird things that people say?
Well, that adds to the story because how people speak and the words they use when they and they may twirl their hair or
Hmm.
whatever they're doing, that gives us some insight into their character.
Right.
So yeah, I try and go word for word, because I can't change what you say
Right.
because that would not be that would be bad,
Right. That would be
especially in a
fiction.
book. That would be fiction. And I definitely, I didn't want to get in trouble. I mean, it was kind of really pounded into our heads at Goucher. You don't make stuff up. You don't do composite characters. You don't, you know, well, I think they said this. No, they said this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what you have to work with.
Do you still have that tape recorder?
I do. Oh gosh,
Is it the same one?
I do.
Oh my god. Okay.
Uh,
Wow, that's cool.
it's not on my shelf, but yes, I do.
Okay.
And I couldn't figure it out how to work it when I first got it. I was like, oh, but eventually
Yeah.
I learned how to work.
It's
Yeah,
like, and the rest was history.
exactly.
That's an
And
interesting.
I really hate transcribing interviews. It is like one of the worst things to do because I have to listen to the sound of my own voice for
Oh,
hours and not good.
Yeah, that does take some getting used to. When I first started editing videos, I was like, no, ugh, okay. But yeah, you have to get used to it. Um, so what inspired, well, let's talk about both of them, but what first inspired Forever 51? Let's start with that one. So what was your inspiration? You said you loved it, you had a lot of fun, but how did that get started?
It started with a conversation with my son, and I think he was in 5th grade at the time. And he was an avid reader, very curious. So, Mom, what would you think would happen if, like, this teenage boy who was a vampire went to a tanning salon before, so he wouldn't be so pasty? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then, like, all that day, I kept thinking about a vampire going to a tanning salon,
Hmm.
like a spray tan, not getting
Right.
actual sun on, but like a spray on tan. And that seed just got planted. And I'm like, that's really funny. What would happen? You know, what would happen? And instead of the teen vampire, it's a woman who is eternally 51. So she's
Hmm.
not at the most desirable age to be turned into a creature of the night. She's just, she's menopausal and she's got chin hair and she's just not very happy. So,
Well, I think that's an interesting angle, though. I mean, you don't see that very often in vampire fiction that's coming out now. It's usually, the young, hot teen vampires, or maybe in their 20s or 30s, and they are still pretending to go to high school in some cases, but a vampire who's actually an adult is an
yes.
interesting.
Yes. Well, I mean, people who've read it, see, I didn't read a lot of vampire. I mean, okay, I've read Interview with the Vampire. I mean,
Hmm.
years ago, I read Let Me In,
Hmm.
and I read the first Twilight book because I wanted to see what
Right.
it was all about. But I didn't, so I don't really know what the vampire kind of, everything that's out there. I mean, there's sexy vampires um, and I was just like, no, this is not going to be that story. This is
Right.
going to be, um, it's going to be more of like a story about mistakes and redemption and um, wanting the wanting to be able to die on your own terms,
Hmm.
which as a vampire is rather difficult.
Right. Right.
So those are the themes I explore in my vampire novel.
So now it's interesting, Death on Your Own Terms, because your nonfiction book is Death Becomes Us. So what inspired that, or what made you want to write that? Or since it's nonfiction, I mean, it's not really, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but what drove you to explore that topic in a real life way?
Okay, well, that one's an even weirder story. And so I got into Goucher College, and the fact that I was accepted, I felt like a big, like, they made a mistake. I'd only had one thing published in my life. I'm like, and I was going to school with like these, people who were journalists and, they were like writers and they were writing big stuff. And I was like, well, I think I'll just write about my family or something because I have a rather odd family. Um, and so it was low residency. And so I would talk to my mentor. We'd schedule phone calls, so we had a call scheduled, and I believe it was September the 8th. And, my kids were young at the time, and um, I had them upstairs watching SpongeBob, and I was downstairs, and I'm waiting for her to call, and she's not calling. So I look up her number and I dial it and I get a funeral home. I'm like, sorry, hang up, dial it again, and I get the funeral home. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. And so I'm sitting there thinking about funeral homes. And finally, my mentor calls me, and I'm like, "Do you live in a funeral home?" She's like, "No, but when I'm on the phone, my landline, and somebody calls me, the call will go directly to this funeral home, and I have no idea where they're at." I'm like, "That is really weird."
Yeah.
And she was on the phone because she just found out that her favorite author had killed himself, David Foster Wallace. And
Oh.
so she was talking about death, and I was on the phone with a funeral home. And I'm like, man, I could not work in a funeral home. And I'm like, who would want to do that? I mean, that just sounds so depressing, you know? And she's like, well, why don't you go find out who works at a funeral home? And I was like, uh, okay. So I agreed to do it because I wanted to impress her. And I was totally scared because I had wicked bad social anxiety, and going out and meeting with strangers to talk about their professions was pretty scary to me. But once I got started, it was just like the universe kept delivering stuff to me, like, putting stuff in my, space, like, okay, you want to learn about death? Well, here it is. I divorced my hairdresser, go to my new hairdresser, and we're making small talk. And I'm like, so do you have any kids? And she's like, I used to. And I was like, oh no. Turns out her son had died, her toddler, from choking. So it was like I was faced with this, like, I just didn't know what to do in the presence of her grief. And I didn't, I'm a fixer. I want, and there is no fixing grief.
Right.
I couldn't say anything that would just make it all go away. So then, she's like, you should talk to my husband because he is in school to become an EMT. So then I did that. And then I followed the EMTs through the summer. And so it's like, it was just this weird journey of learning about death. And it, as I said, it wasn't the most fun. I was faced with a lot of uncomfortable feelings, and but the book definitely changed me just by, I just feel like now if someone is grieving, I don't want to like slink under the table or avoid them. I feel like, I could sit there and listen to them or, be okay with that. Whereas before I couldn't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it looks like you got something out of it. Do you still have the same social anxieties? Talking to
Well,
strangers?
I actually, I write about it in the book. I did cognitive behavioral therapy for 4 months through a study at SMU. And so it was exposure therapy. So it was basically you have to do the things you're afraid of, like over and over and over again. I think my last thing I had to do was I had to go approach like a busy bar restaurant and just go approach a table of guys and go, hi, I'm an author. Would you like to hear 3 pages of my book? And then read it to them. And I was
Wow.
like, in my mind, I'm thinking, they're going to think I'm crazy and I can't do this. They were like, sure. And then they're like, hey, are you on Facebook? And I'm like, yeah. So what that taught me is that the things that come into my head are way worse than the
Right.
actual reality of a situation.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, if I go to a cocktail party or any sort of social gathering that's large, I do still get those uncomfortable feelings. But now I know I'm not going to die,
What's the
I'll
worst
just
that
get
could
sweaty.
happen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Um, so those are two pretty divergent paths. You have, on the one hand, you have your nonfiction sort of was kind of a weird circumstance, like a little providential maybe, and then you had your other idea was just a fun conversation that you were exploring. So when you're looking for your next idea, where do you typically go?
Well, my next idea is I want to write book 2 in the vampire
Okay.
series. But if we're talking about like, are there other things? I mean, I have so much to draw upon in my real life. I mean, I I need to write a memoir at some point. I mean, my father was a professional poker player. My brother was a
Oh,
bank
wow.
robber. So I have some stuff to write about.
All right. So I don't know. Can you write that as nonfiction, or do you have to maybe fictionalize that a little bit to hide to
Mm,
save the reputations of a few people, I guess.
mm, well, no, it'd be written as nonfiction.
All right.
But, I don't know if I'll write that. People want me to write that, but not the people who are in it.
Well, yeah, that's names have been changed to protect the innocent, uh,
Yeah,
or the not so innocent, I guess, in maybe
exactly.
some cases. All right. So you said you're not the kind of person that can just get up and write every day. So as a writer, what happens to you when you haven't been writing enough? Do you ever get the feeling like if you haven't been putting the time in, that something starts to happen?
Um, no, I don't feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to write because if I'm not writing, I'm reading. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
like a pretty avid reader. And um, so I feel like if I'm reading, it's kind of like working on writing because I think as a writer, you have to read a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and, I wish that, I mean, in a perfect world, I could have like somebody give me a ton of money so I could just sit and, write. That would be awesome. But, I don't think people get into writing for the money. At least I didn't, I just love story and I like to make people laugh. So I was like, but it'd be nice to, you know, go to a writer's retreat and have 2 weeks to
Hmm.
just do nothing but write and read and have no interruptions and have people bring food and sounds awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
universe, bring that on. I
Well,
need it.
yeah. Um, so this is sort of my cheat question because I interviewed one of the people I interviewed is Brooke, and I met Brooke through the writers group. So I also know you through writers group. So what do you think the benefits are of being in a group like that, being in a writers group?
Okay, I think it is extremely beneficial to be a part of a writers group, as says the woman who hasn't attended in over like 2 years.
Hey, it's
Um,
COVID, everything's weird.
yeah. But I have to say, like, between joining the DFW Writers Workshop and my MFA program, I mean, both of them were awesome, but I think I actually learned more being in a writers group
Hmm.
because the benefit for me was being, and this sounds really bad, but being able to hear bad writing, you know? I
Hmm.
think I learn more by listening to what doesn't work rather than listening or reading really what does work.
Hmm.
Because in the in our setting, it's a read and critique group. You hear 10 minutes and then it's deconstructed as to why this isn't working and what possibly could make it better. And I learned a lot from that. Not that I'm like the most awesome writer in the whole world, but I just think that looking at, maybe some not so great beginner writing is really beneficial. And when you're in an MFA program, pretty much everyone kind of writes on
Yeah,
a pretty good level. But in a writer's group, you're getting everybody. You're getting
right.
like people who've, you know, written 10 books, and you're getting people who are like, I've written 3 pages and I'd like to read it to you right now. you know?
Yeah,
So,
and there's always, and even if you've had those 10 books, there's still always room for improvement. There can always be some kind of insight. Um, and the insight can come, I found that insight can come from some of the from that person who's only ever written 3 pages. Um, because, again, you were talking about readings, right? Writers are readers. So, even if you can't hear it in your own, you can help critique other people and um, yeah, I find that everyone can have something to say, and some is more beneficial than others, but you never know where that thing that you're missing is going to come from which critique, who's going to have that insight for you. So,
Yep. And also just, you know, I guess I'm just kind of stupid or lazy, but I will listen to something and I'll be like, I'll just know intuitively that it's good.
mhm,
Like I want to keep listening. And
mhm,
then this taught me how to go, okay, now why is it not good? Why did I stop listening? And
mhm,
that is really important. And it also helped um, when you read your words aloud, which I'd never done before the writer's workshop. That is so beneficial to
mhm.
read something out loud because then you're like, oh, wow, that sounds wrong. So
Yeah,
I, I
even I
like,
heard that.
yeah, I like that. So I need to go back.
Well, I mean, I'm back now, so I hope to go through the DFW area, and yeah. This has turned into like a weird pitch for the DFW Writers Workshop, but I mean, but I think it'd be interesting. I leave my contact information in the videos, and if people ever want to know anything about something like the DFW Writers Workshop, you can always start your own. Um, you just need people who are willing to gather around, and you can use the timer on your phone to keep time. I mean, I'm not stealing their idea. Like these groups exist everywhere, but it doesn't have to be something that is organized to the same massive level. Like you can, as long as you can find enough people that are interested, you could do your own group like that.
Yep. Yes, you can. But I have been in several writers groups where I end up being the only one producing any writing. And then it's people will show up and they'll
Yeah.
just like, we just came to hear what you wrote. It's like,
That's not the
well, that's,
idea. It's not the
yeah,
best
no,
idea.
it's like, I need to hear you write.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I like the professionalism and the
Hmm.
fact that there are people producing new work a lot.
Right.
And I'm sure there are those groups all over the place, but in this particular area of the world, they're pretty good.
Yeah. So what is a trope or a character you find yourself drawn to in fiction?
The underdog,
Mm-hmm.
always. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like the biggest trope of all. But, you know, I want a character that, you know, is going to overcome some odds and doesn't look like the one that we're going to root for. But, you know, I find underdog characters to be very endearing and I want them to win. So I can't help it. I like it, even in movies and in books. That's what I'm drawn to,
All right.
the underdog.
All right. Nice. So tell us about your book club. You started something for COVID. So tell us about your book club.
Okay, so I joined the 2020 debuts group on Facebook. It's for people who have a debut novel coming out in 2020. And, as I think it was around March, and I remember Brooke had a book coming out, and I saw that she had to cancel her launch event. And then a
Mhm.
lot of these people were like, oh, my big launch is canceled. And I'm like, well, we should start a book club so that, people who can't do their launch, at least we can, do online. So I thought, I'll start this, 2020 quarantine book club. And I thought, 50 people would join. And, that's a lot. If you get 50
Yeah.
people to all read one book, that's pretty darn good. Um, and for whatever reason, it just took off and went kind of crazy. We now have like 1,400 members.
Wow.
Not that they're not, there's probably like a core of maybe 30 who are super engaged and buy the book and post selfies and participate in discussions. But, um, and it's kind of waning and, it's changing and morphing because now everything's online.
Hmm.
In the beginning, it was just like, well, what's going to happen? But now I think the publishing world has shifted to like, well, this is it.
Hmm.
This is, you're going to do your launch, you know, with the bookstore, but it's going to be via Zoom,
Yeah.
So I, the book club I formed has lost its shiny new appeal, but it's still going, and I like it because I love talking to authors, and so I get to interview an author every month and talk about their book, and I enjoy that.
Cool. Maybe I should jump in. I had my 2020 debut, so I'll take a look.
When was that?
June 1st, 2020.
Really?
Yeah. I have my other show on my channel is Anything Nice to Say, which what I do is I watch a movie that people think is bad or that I've heard is bad or has really bad critic rating, and I try to find the silver lining to it. So, what's a movie that you love that you think is underappreciated or that you've heard is bad?
Well, okay. Well, there's a movie that I loved back in the 90s that I don't think a lot of people know about, or it wasn't a commercial success, called Dogfight. Have you ever heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's with River Phoenix
Okay.
and Lily Taylor, and the premise is these Marines. I think they're Marines. It's during the Vietnam War, and they've got 24 hours, and they're all trying to find the ugliest woman for this contest.
Okay.
So they go out to like find these women, and then they're gonna like who could find the most unattractive woman.
Right.
And River Phoenix picks Lily Taylor, and then he ends up falling for her.
Okay.
So it's a very it starts out like, well, what a bunch of jerks, but then it turns into a nice love story. I don't think it was a commercial success, and people that I mention it to, they have no idea. It was from probably the early 90s. Dogfight.
Interesting. I'll take a look at that one. That'll be an interesting add to the list. So where can we find you? On the internet, in real life? Where can we find you?
Okay, well, no one can spell my last name, so I'm going to have to just spell it for you. Everything, Instagram, Twitter, my website is just my name. So it's Pamela Skjolsvik.com. And last name is spelled S as in Sam, Kjol, S as in Sam, V as in Victor, IK, Pamela Skjolsvik.
I'll put it up
and
there.
And that's where you can find me.
So everyone can see it.
And I'm not that big on Twitter. I don't like Twitter. I'm not that big on Instagram. But Facebook, I do have a Facebook author page and a personal page, and that's
cool.
where you can find me, because that's where the old people hang out, is on Facebook.
Well, I'm on Facebook. Everybody's still on Facebook. People say it's for old people, but I'm like, you're there too, so it's not for old people.
Okay.
Okay, so I am going to switch over to our subscriber questions. These are submitted by my subscribers, and only subscribers get to hear the answers. So if you want to become a subscriber, you can feel free to head over to Patreon. Thanks for watching Two Authors Talking. To become a subscriber, head on over to Patreon and submit your questions. You'll also have access to exclusive content. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to see when we drop new interviews and also other content on our channel. See you next time.